This is obviously pretty informal, and I'll probably sit a lot of the time just because I've been standing for quite a while, and you guys have been standing and moving. When they asked me to do this, they asked me not to talk about firefighting very much, okay? And instead talk about what we do, how we approach training of athletes. So what I'm going to talk about here is just a very general way how we approach training of our elite athletes. Not our general athletes, but the elite group that we work with. And that's basically what you guys are down here. It says World Championships. It's an elite group of people. Obviously, I'm Randy Huntington. I do work for Kaiser at this point in time. I'm Global Director of Marketing, Education, Performance, and Research. That is my contact information, so if you have any questions after this, feel free to email me or call me. I'm on Skype. I'm pretty available. That's my job. So I always start out every time I do speaking, and I just came back from the UK where I did a number of talks for the Premiership football teams, soccer in this country. We went to Tottenham and Liverpool and a number of others while I was over there, as well as being at Leaders in Performance, where we get all the best performance people in the world come together for this meeting. And I always start out here because every time I do one of these, I usually learn a lot more about what you do than even what I do. And that's certainly part of our goal as performance people is starting to understand what happens in your world. I don't pretend to understand what happens in the fireman's world yet, firefighter's world, excuse me, because I haven't done it. Was fortunate enough, my grandfather was fire chief in Dearborn, Michigan, but back in those days, they retired as soon as they weren't physically able to perform anymore. So he retired at 45. He had to leave the force at 45. So it's like he was retired and became a farmer at 45 years of age because he no longer could potentially perform what they considered. And he also was on some pretty toxic fires at the Ford Motor Company during those times in the 40s. If you ever done any study the history of those fires in Dearborn. So my journey, as a coach, and all the technological education revelations come through to me over the years. And I'm going to show you this next slide because this really kind of tells a bit of my story. This is a little bit of my coaching history. From Gretzky to the Broncos to Oklahoma State, the Eagles, Lions, Broncos again, Colts, Toby Stevenson is a silver medalist, Mike Powell, Willie Banks, the two world record holders I've coached in track and field. I've worked with China, South Korea, Sweden, UK, USA. I was sports science coordinator for USA track and field. Also head coach at the Olympic Training Center and assistant coach at the Olympic Training Center. I've done consulting with Woodway, Omega Wave. I was actually the first Omega Wave user in the world and helped set them up. I obviously Kaiser. I'm an Oregon grad, so I coached at Oregon years ago. And I work with HydroWorks, helping them design their underwater treadmill, which would have been great for your situation. But all the technological innovations that have occurred since I was a kid, we're talking about tracks going from cinder tracks to performance tracks we see today, the Mondos, the Recordtans of the world, monitoring systems for athletes. We've gone from pretty prehistoric systems to, and Dr. Davis has certainly seen that change over the years from the labs you were in probably as an undergrad to a grad. Things have changed a lot. My basic philosophy is train dogs, educate people. And if you think about that, there's a big misunderstanding in today's world about training. A lot of people confuse conditioning with training. Training has a purpose and a goal to it. Conditioning has no purpose or goal that I can see. It's one of the reasons, and I'm not going to get into the whole CrossFit situation at all, but for us in the elite level, when we are talking about training somebody, we're talking about all the different elements that go into the system. We started creating what were called PETs a few years back, performance enhancement teams. And we surrounded ourselves with groups. But what we found out is that those groups of people, whether they be physical therapists, sports psychologists, exercise physiologists, strength and conditioning coaches, which in track and field we really don't use. We do all of our own strength and conditioning. And other people that are part of that PET, what happened is they didn't talk to each other. They all did their own thing. So they were a performance enhancement team, but they were a team of individuals. So we changed that over to ISTs, which I would suggest that if you have a department, you have a station, you try to create your own little sort of IST around it. IST is Integrated Support Team. So we look at ISTs now. We look at how do we integrate the support people instead of having them work individually. Because if you're working individually, you don't really know. I mean, you know, for the elite side of it, it's coach-driven, it's athlete-focused, coach-driven. In your case, if you're doing something like this, it's, you know, you're individual, you're the focus, and everybody has to help you achieve your goal. So you can either go out and find them individually, which is what happens most of the time, or you can do it collectively and actually find people in the community who will support each of you in this endeavor to try to make this situation out here in the parking lot even better for you. So train dogs, educate people. Bill Rowe actually said this, and you know, it is it's so easy to train people if you really want to just go out and make somebody work hard. That's really not very difficult to do. And we have, you know, 4,000 CrossFit gyms, and probably 200 of them are really good, you know, and a whole lot aren't. But those 200 can really help you. As I was said down below, and I said up here, when you look at the need to be prepared, that you know, for anything, you know, you can probably make a very good case that there's components of that type of training that will put you in a position to be prepared for anything coming at you that world's gonna throw at you in an emergency situation. When we start with a needs analysis. That's the very first thing we do. Well, first you need to know the sport. In your case, that's really hard to do. Your sport is saving human lives in a variety of different ways. From the situation we had in Sun Valley, Idaho, where I live this summer, where we had this huge fire, where we didn't lose any lives, but we only lost one structure, which was pretty darn good for 130,000 acres of very fast-moving fire. But for us, we've got to know the characteristics of the sport, and we have to know the athlete. So first thing we do is we study the sport. So we happen to have somebody who studied your sport quite a bit, in Paul here. So he's the guy that knows your sport. I don't know your sport. I may be able to understand the physical demands pretty quickly, but I don't know your sport, and I certainly don't know any of you yet. So when somebody comes up to me, and it happens all the time, hey, can you tell me how to do this workout? I can't answer them. It's not part of what I do, because I don't know anything about them. I would be remiss in telling them what to do, actually. So the evaluation of the sport. We look at all the movement analysis, and we look at what's happening. I mean, one of the interesting parts is that very little anthropometric work has been done on sport movement. It'd be interesting for me to actually measure the guys out there, because as I'm looking at them, I'm seeing a lot of people look a lot alike. You know, there's a lot of people in a certain height range, the particular ones that are really fast. There's certain body lever segments that are the same. It's really kind of interesting, and that's part of what we do. We also do a physiological analysis. We look at strength, power, hypertrophy. How do they hypertrophy? What are they, good hypertrophy people or not? You know, there's now all the gene part of this that you can figure out exactly who that individual is. And then we look at muscular endurance priorities. We do EMG studies, jump testing. We have a whole slew of different tests we're going to do to find out who you are. Then once we find out who you are, then we compare you to who the best are. Do you look anything like them? So if we took the top 5 people down here on a regular basis, do you look like them? And if you don't look like them, then what do you have to do to change your body outside of obviously the anthropometric part? What do you have to change your body to achieve what they do? You may not be capable of it. You know, the first rule is to choose your parents well. You know, it's just the way it works. You got to choose mom and dad properly or you're screwed. And then we look at injury analysis. And this is, you can see pretty regularly where the injuries are going to occur. In my primary area of jumping, of horizontal jumping and pole vaulting and high jumping, I actually coach everything from 800 on down. We can see more than likely where someone's going to be injured because we've seen it all, for years and years and years. We know where the injury points are. We know that, let's say, a good jumper has a 1-to-1 ratio between femur and tibia. A real good 100-meter sprinter is somewhere close to that as well. As they get taller and into longer distances, up to a certain point, then you start to get a shorter femur-tibia ratio. And those are the kind of things you have to look at. Would you do it here? You might. It might, like an example would be, let's take rowing. Anthropometric, which means body levers. What do you think is the most important body lever measurement in rowing?
Torso length.
Torso length, okay, good guess.
Arm length.
Arm length, getting real close.
Upper to ratio here.
Yep. It's the ability to pull. It's that lever system. It's this ratio. I can pull like anything. I cannot push hardly anything. I would have been probably a very good rower. That's the number one thing. Height is number 2, leg length is number 3. So when you study that, the highest correlations are this ratio. You would think it would be height. That's because you see rowers that walk in a room and they're big old guys, or women. You see the Chinese rowers where the women walk in a room and they look like American guys. I mean, they're 6'3", 6'4", they're just beasts, They haven't shown it yet in the Worlds, although, well, they actually did do well in the Worlds, just not in the Olympics this last time. So this is how we evaluate the sport. This is an old Dennis Kaiser slide. Anybody seen Dennis talk? And when you evaluate your sport, it is know your race and build your car. Same thing here, know your race, then build your car. I was commenting, and I think Paul might have heard this from Steve. I was commenting to Steve, I said, these guys are doing this thing in 3 and 4 minutes. They're killing themselves. That's just painful, The ones that can do it quicker are actually in a better situation, and I think it's more efficient. So, how do you want to build that race? How do you want to build the car that will meet that race? And then you have to look at all of your inefficiencies and the things that you have in order to achieve that. We'll talk something about how that. So for me, in coaching Mike Powell, and I'll just use this as a quick example, I had to look at Mike's competitor, which was Carl Lewis. And I had to look at what Carl was doing, and I had all Carl's data because we did biomechanical studies on him, so we knew what his data was. So I said, okay, where's Carl's deficiencies? Well, his deficiency was right here. He lost horizontal velocity in his last step. You can see it here. And he didn't have great vertical velocity. He did not know how to transfer horizontal to vertical. Now I knew that Mike Powell was never going to be faster than Carl. Carl's 11:26, Mike was 10:94. I could make Mike as close to as fast as I could, but Carl was the current world record holder 2 days before this competition took place. Right at that time, running 9:83, I think it was. So in looking at Carl, who was the guy to beat, and we knew he was the guy to beat, I said, what can I do to Mike? Well, I have to be able to get Mike to pass over his last step and maintain his horizontal velocity better, which he did. He carried a higher horizontal velocity over that. And I had to have him get a greater vertical velocity. And you can see that vertical velocity is actually pretty incredible. You're running almost 24 miles an hour and then being able to go 4 meters per second up at the end of that 24 minutes. I mean, get in a car, go 24 miles an hour, jump out, put your foot down, and see what happens. It won't be a pretty experience, So we had to figure this out, and it took us 4 years to do it. But it was doable, and you can do it without drugs. It just takes longer. And you had to figure out, what can I do? What kind of program, what kind of lifting, what are the physical elements I need to improve on this particular guy in order for him to be the best in the world, and arguably still the best ever. I won't say that Mike is, because I think Carl was the best long jumper ever. That's just an idea of the kind of things we have to do. We have to look at all the different aspects and say, okay, what part can I beat him at? Where's his weakness? If you're looking at the top 3 guys down here, what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses? Where do they fall down? And film them and look at them and see. Somebody's going to be able to tell you. He might be able to tell you. Because it got all, I mean, if you sit there and we're watching the clock, we're saying, okay, if they get down here in this amount of time, they're going to do this, then we look at the way they lift, and the way they're hitting the Kaiser, and we're like, okay, we're starting to see where people are doing it better and not. There's some efficiencies in there that you can study and you can improve upon. Now, I put this up because, you know, you look at your task. You have emergency tasks and non-emergency tasks. In this case, non-emergency tasks. And I, you know, knowing it, I mean, I'm just here at 60. The things that will hurt me are the stupid things in life. You know, picking up the garbage wrong, raking the leaves. You just don't expect to be hurt doing something so simple. And you just turn the wrong way, and even if your core is strong, although mine's big right now, you can tweak yourself. So I just wanted to put this up there because the non-emergency tasks are a place where the older responders can get injured easier. They're not taking care of business. Now, the other thing that we talk about, and this is part of your life, even though it doesn't really show up in here anywhere, you know, in terms of a task during this test, and that is, you know, avoidance reactions versus pursuit reaction strategies. Now, you know, the antelope there is having avoidance reaction strategies, and the cheetah is having pursuit reaction. They're completely different strategies, and your mind works differently. So when you're going into an emergency situation, you may have to avoid something and you may have to pursue something within seconds of each other. You know, if this was, let's say, a moose and a grizzly bear, they could be going back and forth between those two things immediately in a fight. One's avoiding, one's pursuing. The other one turns into the other one's pursuing, the other one's avoiding. You know, in sport, basketball is both. You're on offense and defense. In football, if you're playing on the defensive side, you've got pursuit strategies. If you're on the offensive line, you have avoidance strategies if you're a running back or a wide receiver, and you've got pursuit strategies if you're a lineman. They're different, and your mind works differently, and you cue differently. We won't go into cueing, but that's just part of what we have to think about. So the emergency tasks, there's no way I could define those. They're unknown. There's so many of them. There's so many, and they're all different, you know, some the same, but, and then when we talk about CrossFit, I think that this is probably where it fits from a mental standpoint. Mentally preparing you to do anything physical that you might be up against in the emergency world. It's, you know, how do you prepare for anything? It's, you know, mentally, you have to be able to do that. Physically, you got to make sure you don't get hurt trying to do it. This is an interesting, very busy slide. You can't read it, but I'll read it to you. This is injury. This is the Atlanta Falcons. This is an NFL team. And this is looking at everything and tracking over a whole year, every single rep, set, on the field movement pattern, everything. They did it for a whole year. And they had all this data, but they didn't know what it meant. And so they brought it in and started moving it around and looking at it. And then they said, so what is causing us injury? Why are we getting injured? And if you look at the big balls, those are the things that are causing injury. And down here, we'll start with the biggest two. Body fat percentage was obviously one of the big ones. You guys are too big, they weren't fit enough. Now, over here is number of, this, if you read these, this is, I gotta put my glasses on, they're so small actually. This is training practice time and training number of plays during training practice. Overwork, getting them fatigued, practicing too much. Try telling an NFL coach he's practicing too much. Watch how long you have a job, you know. Again, the coaches would not buy into this, but when you show them this data, they start to have to think, like, you know, we gotta have fresh legs on Sunday or Monday, so what do we do? And then up here is the position. Well, there was more injuries in the position, certain positions, than there were in others. Up here is body weight. Over here is aerobic status, so their actual aerobic conditioning was an indicator, contributed to injury. And then over here is their height. It really was surprised to see height, but it's, you know, it's not so much. The interior linemen are the biggest guys in the field, the tallest guys usually, and they're usually the ones that get hurt the most, outside tight ends as well. So it's still interior. So the biggest guys have are the most susceptible to injury because they're getting blows that, you can hurt them. They're in compromised position. They're in close quarter battling. So this just gives you a view of what it's like for a team to understand what contributes to their injury profile. Nobody had ever done it before. Nobody knew why an injury was caused. And now they're starting to see what are the main things and if you look at this big red line, body weight to the age of the player to the height are the three, what ended up being the three biggest contributors when you combine them to injury. So age becomes an issue. So those of you that are older, understand that you gotta, we're gonna talk about this. So we have to assess the athlete. So we do physical testing and evaluation. We do a lot of testing and evaluation. We use the omega wave. We do brain testing. We look at aerobic system status, anaerobic system status. We do some athletes will do a VO2 on, but the VO2 is a very poor indicator of true performance ability. It happens to give you this nice thing to tell you whether you chose your parents well or not. Again, the tests we do have to be related to the sport. General tests don't seem to accomplish much. You get this nice profile, but you can't really use it to help you define what you need to do with the athlete. It's one of the reasons why you're seeing the movement analysis and the FMS kind of get attacked right now. It's unfortunate at one level, but at another level, it's still general, and it's a movement analysis that does not predict performance. It's not meant to predict performance. It was never meant to predict performance. It was meant to tell you what might be right or might be what might be wrong with that person and their movement skills, but not the performance skills. And it's been taken to the performance level, and it was not intended to do that. So we have to be very careful. I think the FMS is a very good system, but don't.
I think even more than that, it was stated in the beginning, like your better athletes would be able to cheat this, but you have to watch them closely.
You get a lot of 20s, on these they're good athletes. It's like, okay, why do the test? Because they can pass it. And you're right, the great athletes are the great accommodators. They can change their bodies or do anything. That's why they're great athletes. And there is this kind of Stu McGill, Gray Cook thing going on. You guys may know who Stu is and Gray. Gray obviously is FMS. Stu is a professor at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And they just finished a study in FMS, I think. Dave Frost did with Pensacola Fire Department. Just came out like last week or the week before. So then after we do the testing, we compare the results with normative data. What do? We compare them to the great ones. Our normative data are the best in the world. We want to know what they're like. So when I look at this athlete and look at our tests, we look back historically at what people were made of. Now you don't have that data here. All you have here are times, You don't have height, weight, age. Well, you have age, but you may not have height and weight and other ways of comparing yourself to those individuals. And there are ways to do that today that you can incorporate into the system. So we've got to be able to, we've got to be able to determine the key performance characteristics in the sport. So we look for, it's essential for us achieving our goals. Our biomechanical evaluation has to be spot on. We've got to know what to look for, what to test for. Like I said, we look at the athletes in the other sports, the other athletes in that sport, because we have to know who they are. Because the great ones are what you want to look at. And then you want to be able to beat them. When I looked at Carl, I had to see what could I do to Carl? What could I do with Mike to beat this guy? Because he was unbeatable. He'd never been beaten. In years, it's going on 12 years or so at that point. He hadn't been beaten. So. And then the interesting one is this last one. And this is up until recently, the hardest one to do. Ongoing monitoring of your physical condition. If you take a coach and he's real honest, he doesn't really know what he's doing to the individual. It's my biggest complaint about CrossFit. There is no assessment. No real true assessment being done. There is no ongoing monitoring. So you don't know exactly how fatigued somebody is, exactly how well they're adapting to the stress you're putting them under. And in my world, it's all about stress adaptation. If you don't adapt, you die. And if you push them too hard, they may adapt. I'm going to show you some slides here in a minute. I'll show you how this works in terms of the human body. Then we start planning for success after all that evaluation, that needs analysis. You know, and the big thing is we look at we use the ADDIE plan. I use an ADDIE plan. I don't know if you guys use ADDIE or not out there, but ADDIE is just analysis, design, development, implement, and evaluate. It's called an ADDIE plan. The big part of that is the SWOT analysis. Now, SWOT analysis, you don't think about using that in sport, or otherwise it's a business model. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Well, that's what sport is. You know, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are your opportunities to do better, and what are the threats to keep you from doing that? It's actually a basis for everything, and very few do it. So we use a regular, good old, flat-out marketing SWOT analysis form, and then we do it for the athletes. And do it for yourself. Each individual has to do one now for me. So they all have to figure out their own SWOT analysis. So what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my opportunities to be better? My weaknesses are usually my opportunities. You know? And what are the threats? You know, lack of training condition, lack of good coaching, lack of good nutrition, lack of the sport. I mean, there's things that can be threats to keeping you from achieving that model. And then, as we plan, I always put this up because, maybe you've seen this before. This is pretty standard out there. I'll tell you a real quick story. My father died 2 years ago, and I was going through his wallet after his funeral, and I pulled out a card he had that had this exact quote on there. And it was from Henry Ford, given to him in 1946. And the Ford Motor Company used this as their control pattern, as their way of planning and thinking back in the 40s. But it's really simple. I mean, all you have to do is know what, why, when, how, where, and who, and you can write a training plan. You just got to know those things. If you don't take into account all those things, you aren't going to write a plan that's going to be specific to that individual. The other thing we do out of this planning is we look at, for us, we have to look at physical literacy. Because physical literacy, or a lack of a particular movement skill, and in our case, fundamental movement skills and fundamental sports skills, can be the limiting factor. Can you run? Can you sprint? Can you gallop? And those skills actually are here. These are all the skills that we look at, depending upon the sport. Okay? And, you know, in jumping, for instance, I'll use my, you know, this is an example again. We had women that couldn't do one of these things up here. That's a precursor to jumping. Anybody know what the precursor to jumping is? It's actually galloping. People stop galloping when they're like 4 or 5 years old, and then it's over. Some people never gallop. They go right to skipping. They miss the precursor to jumping. They don't learn the motor skill. Then that's the limiting factor. So now you're thinking, wow. Then you look at skipping, you look at swinging and leaping, you look at all these things. We need to know what is going to limit them. Galloping is the first thing we look at now, because we know that's so important. What is that for you down here? It's difficult to determine. I didn't see many people running those high knees very fast, I can tell you that. You know, but I think there's a reason for that, given that there's a whole lot of air being sucked at that particular point. But I did see, the funniest thing is the person who was the fastest through those, from what I could see, was the 51-year-old guy. Tall guy, lean, mean. He was running through those things. Nobody else really ran through. There was one woman that ran through them really well too. Everyone's just kind of plodding through there. Now, they could have known that they were going to advance and they only needed a certain time, But the fact is that, you know, if there was a way to improve time, man, I'd be looking there, because there's nobody going through there real fast. And, whereas everybody seems to be traveling, picking up the dummy and moving it close to the same speed. If you look at the times, there's a little bit of difference, but there's not a lot. There's a lot of difference in the running times. So this is the training model we use. First, we do that initial evaluation I was talking about. And off that evaluation, we look at what's the successful athlete look like. I'm just rehashing this with you. We look at cardiac, metabolic, CNS, neuromuscular abilities for those guys. And off of there, we set a goal. We set a long-term goal. Might be the Olympic Games, might be World Championships, might be Pan Am Games. Could be something like that. For us, for you, it'd be this. You know. And then we set a short-term goal. Off of that short-term goal, we now create a training session based upon the things we know here. Then off of that training session, we see a physiological change, and off that physiological change, we see an immediate training effect and then a postponed training effect. But now we got to evaluate two. got to have a second evaluation. How do you do that? Well, one of the ways we do it right now is, and I did work on this with Ty Saban. The University of Michigan does it. The Patriots are doing it now. The Bengals are doing it. The Broncos are doing it. What they're doing is they're looking at the readiness of the athlete that day by going in and using a Kaiser squat set at a relatively low resistance, and then they're moving the crap out of it as fast as they can, and that's going to tell them where their CNS is for the day, because they can read that power output, and power shows you components of power, force, and velocity. The velocity side is central nervous system. Are they prepared? Is their central nervous system prepared to come back and get after it again? Well, this is a nice way. That's the way they're evaluating. I happen to use the OmegaWave to do this evaluation, so I can evaluate every day. Today, OmegaWave now has a portable evaluation system. Any of you have ever seen it? It costs you a little money. It's not as expensive as it once was. It goes on your phone. Every day you know whether you're ready. All you do is wake up in the morning and test yourself. Reads it out. You can send it up to a computer. You can have a master somewhere, and you can be monitoring everybody in the station if you want. Everybody in the whole, you could have everybody in the whole city if you wished. Be able to monitor how well they are doing that day, and how well they've adapted to either whatever stress they have. Because stress is not specific to physical stress. Stress is stress. Your body does not know what stress is. It cannot discriminate among stresses or stressors. If you're being yelled at by your boss, that's the same as being yelled at by your girlfriend or your wife, or, well, there's no husbands in here, I guess, right now. It's the same as being sick. It's the same as going out and do a tough physical workout. Your body doesn't know the difference. So we want to be able to monitor daily. And that's what it's come to in the elite athletic world, is being able to monitor on a daily basis. Being able to understand what that athlete has done and how they're adapting to the stress either you've put them under or they're under in their life. And this just repeats. Off of that new evaluation, we set another goal, because if they're not ready, well, I can't go do what I was planning. That's why I don't do any periodization any longer. I write a general plan, but my periodization is individualized. Now it's yours, or yours, or yours. It's not, okay, we're going to do this week, you guys. We've got 7 days. We're going to work out 4 days. It's going to be this, and you throw that one out the window, because nobody's adapting to that one well. They're all adapting at some level, but nobody's adapting optimally. And in my world, it's optimal adaptation, or you're going to get beat. You know, we don't have the luxury of not being optimized. If you're not going to use drugs, PEDs in the sports world, you've got to be able to optimize your training. And that takes you to a philosophical stance that I established 30 years ago, and that is, in my view, you do the least amount of training to get the greatest benefit. You don't do the most amount of training to get the greatest benefit, because that's stupid. Why would you? You would do the least amount to get the greatest benefit, because after that, you're doing more than you need to. After that, it's wasted time and wasted effort. And there's no place for it. We don't have time for that, because we have too many elements to do. And if you look at the great coaches in the world, this is what they all say the same thing. You do the least amount you need to do to get the greatest benefit. This is where I get a little crossways with CrossFit. Not to use the two words together, because they don't understand that part. Instead, they're doing real high volume at very high intensities, which is greater than you need to achieve what you need to do. And we're finally starting to see some of the CrossFit guys understand that and change it, which is great to see, because they're starting to build rest and recovery into, not just changing the watt, they're actually building rest and recovery into the workout. And they're monitoring it. So we got some of these guys that are figuring it out and monitoring it, and it's going to make them exceptional CrossFitters. They're just exceptional. And we do this throughout until we get a net cumulative training effect, and we either have a successful performance or an unsuccessful performance. And you could have either. And there could be varying reasons. But if you do this right, it doesn't happen. So next I'm going to show you, how many of you have seen the supercompensation graph? It's been around for 35 years. Everybody seen it before? Anybody seen it before? No hands? Okay. This is the basis for every training unit. This is the way it works, guys. And this is the formula for every for training. It's work plus restoration, recovery, rest equals adaptation or improvement. If you did nothing but come away from this today with that formula in your head, then you're going to be better off than you were. Because note that both of these are on that side of the equal sign. What's that mean, Paul? They're the same, eh? They have equal importance. Rest and recovery is equal to work. It is the only thing, essentially, CrossFit hadn't figured out yet. That if you can get the right amount of rest and recovery, you will blow up. I mean, you'll take off. But if you're doing it and not taking the rest and recovery, then you're just going to be in a continuous spiral. And I'm going to show you what that spiral looks like. This is the supercompensation curve. This Hans Selye from the 50s. There's other things that look similar to it from the 20s and 30s. But this is the basic curve we use. So we look at you. Here's your current performance training level. Okay? Now we add a stressor. There's our workout, or being yelled at, or this competition. But that's a stressor. Your reaction to any stressor is fatigue. It's a sympathetic reaction usually, and you lose the ability. This is, remember, your performance level here. You lose the ability to perform. Exercise in and of itself is a destructive device. It is not a positive device. It destroys your body, okay? It hurts you. It makes you think you're sick. That's why you do the rest and restoration. The real key in training is this side of the plus sign. This is easy. This takes courage. It takes real courage to understand that you have to rest to be able to achieve your goals. What happens when you rest? You start back up. You get parasympathetic dominant. We're looking at the autonomic nervous system here. We'll get parasympathetic dominance on the second half of this recovery. This starts the restore regulators of the central governor. We're looking at adaptation, and we look at supercompensation. We now restore to a new level. How the heck do we know when that level is? I'll tell you don't, unless you're measuring it. And the only way I know I'm measuring it right now is with some of the stuff, either a megawave or Powell, iAthlete, or some of the others that are measuring autonomic nervous system response. The game is played in the autonomic nervous system. It's played right here. That's where recovery and work take place. If you really want to see what you're doing, and if you want to actually adapt to your training, you monitor these two systems and see how they're playing with each other. So here's what happens when we're training, we're not doing it so hot. We end up with this kind of response here, which means that our ability to actually perform goes down. And the only way we can get back to a new condition is we have to rest. And if you look at this system here, which is that graph here, psychologically, this is a bitch. You got to be one strong son of a gun to be able to do this. Because psychologically, you're failing every day. And you don't see the end of the tunnel because you think you're going down and down and down. You feel like crap, you look like crap, your performance is crap. This is not fun. It's a really poor way to train. Because then you're dependent on resting to get back to the condition you need to be in. And you have to hope that you know what this time frame is. And you do it well. Now, if you're monitoring it, then what you know is that when you get to you know when you're here each time. So now I can apply a new stress. Now I can apply a new stress in each time. I know when to apply the stress. If I don't know when to apply the stress, I'm applying it inappropriately. And I don't care how good you are, and I'm pretty darn good at this. There's no way I can know when to apply a stress to somebody unless I'm measuring it. And I've been measuring it since 2000. So prior to that, I was guessing. I was pretty lucky because I guessed well. We were using other things. We didn't even know that we were doing it this way back then. We kind of had a sense of it. But today, we know, and we can use it. And this is the real key. You know, in music, it isn't the notes themselves that create the music. If you think about it, lots of notes out there, all right? And there's similar grouping of notes in lots of different pieces of music. But it's really the space between the notes, or the silence or stillness between the notes that creates the difference between musical pieces. What does that mean? It means that as you're looking at the space between the notes, this is where the real game's played. This is where the artistic side of coaching comes into play. But the artistic side is now based in science as well. We haven't lost that. So for me, I can have, let's say I put too little time between workouts. My notes, there's not enough time, they're too short. I end up with a resultant condition that's lower than. But if I put or if I just put the same amount of time each time, or too big a time, I'm back to my same condition. So I haven't stressed enough. Don't have enough density of training. Too dense of training, not enough density. Here, I've got the appropriate density. I'm measuring it. I know exactly how long to rest them, and I get a great response. And I've been pretty lucky because I'm at 32 Olympians with 5 medalists now, and each time we do it, it's different. I mean, you know, it's really pretty tough to figure out who these people are, because it's mostly the psychological side. It takes you some time to get a handle on.
When you're talking about the resting, typically, are you talking about like in days? I know it's going to be different between athletes, but are you talking about days, or workouts in a day, duration of time?
I'm actually talking. This is pretty theoretical here. This could be, in my case, it could be hours between 2 workouts. They're different workouts. They're working different systems. It could be days. In this case, you'll see these are microcycles, actually. This is the amount of time between microcycles. When you're applying a stressor. So rest, and it's really more restoration, not just rest. But we do know how important sleep is, and we don't get enough of it for most of us today. And that's why I measure it, because when I measure it, I see when that system comes back up, so I know I can now go again. And I feel comfortable going. Years ago, when I first started using this, I figured, okay, I didn't quite understand it completely, but I had a sense of it. So I said, I'm going to try this on some people. So I went and found, no offense, ladies, I found these 8 women who were between 40 and 50. And I said, okay, I'm going to train them like I would train elite female runners. But I'm going to use the whole parasympathetic sympathetic balance system, and I'm going to measure them. I'm going to look at this. I'm going to see what happens. And I measured, and I trained them exactly based upon what it was telling me. Now those women all ran between 23, 25 minutes for a 5K. That's a pretty good time for a 40, 50-year-old female. They weren't elite runners, At the end of that year, the fastest was 17:27, and she was 50 years old. It's pretty good. They all ran under 19. Between 40 and 50. 10Ks were under, the fastest was 34 and change, and most of them ran under 37. And a half marathon, 125, 126 something was the fastest. I mean, they were studs, but they didn't know they were studs when they started, because they were just housewives who wanted to run. They ended up becoming these beast age groupers. I mean, it was amazing to see a 50-year-old woman run 17:20, and she got beat by another 50-year-old, by the way. But she was a Russian, former Russian world record holder, who happened to live in Tacoma, Washington at the time. So, when you can understand when to do this, when do I apply the stress? When do I apply the next stress? That's the key. Figuring out when to apply the next stress is the key. Then, once you apply the stress, the result of the stress we know is diminished ability. Now, how do I figure out how to apply the next stress? Okay, I have to have some way of measuring that. Because just feeling it, I tell you, it doesn't work. I have athletes say, oh, I know when I'm feeling good, when I can go. Yeah, okay, let's see, And they'll go, and I'm looking at their tests going, no, they get about 2 miles and feel like crap, And they do. We had one kid, you may remember him, any of you who might have been in New York City, died in the New York marathoner. I had tested him prior, a while before, and I could not get any kind of stable ECG in him at all. I couldn't get one. I tried and tried. And I told his coach, he said, we got a real problem here. And I said, I think it's I'm guessing, but I think it's a mineral-based issue. One of your real problems is magnesium in power athletes and even in distance runners. and I'm not going to go into that too much, but my guess would have been that he was very, very, magnesium is your heart's mineral, but he was very deficient, probably in mineral, because I'd seen it in other athletes where we did do this, and it brought him right back up to normalcy. This is, how many of you have seen this graph before? Anybody? This is the relationship of your 5 basic areas: speed, strength, endurance, flexibility, and skill. This is from Mel Sif, my good friend Mel, who's passed away now. You know, what I see out there, if you're going past that 2-minute mark, you're really starting to move over into this side of the project here. And we're really about speed, strength, and really power. That's the power area right there in the red. And achieving power is difficult. It may seem easy, but it's not as easy as you might think. And we were, before everybody came in, we were sitting here chatting a bit, and we started talking about Olympic lifts, because there's an injury in Olympic lift here. And I said, well, how much do you do? When do you do it? I said, I don't know. I'm like, what? I said, don't use them. Probably one of the few elite coaches that doesn't use them. Because all I'm interested in is triple extension at high velocities. That's all I care about. I don't care about how good an Olympic lift you are. It really is irrelevant to me. As a matter of fact, the correlation is extremely low. And the Olympic lifts themselves have almost no correlation to most sports. Hard to believe, but when you do the correlations, there's very, very little. And when I look at Olympic lifts and I look at the velocities they're moving at, you look at the world record holders, they're moving at 1.6, 1.7 meters per second. That's how fast the bars are moving. In my world, it's just like I might as well be bowling. That's how fast it is. It's really irrelevant. It's so far removed, it's not relevant anymore. Now, maybe in the very first part, you could probably make a case for rate of force development. But in general, what I do, and I've been doing since 1983, put me on a Kaiser squat, give me frickin' 600 pounds, and let me get after it. Because I'll move it at 2.5, 2.8 meters per second. Now, that's a heck of a lot faster and a whole lot more resistance and a lot more power than when I'm getting at 1.6, 1.7 meters per second. And when people do it, and you'll see here in a second, what really got me going, if you want to be powerful, Bill Sands, great scientist, your first responsibility is still to get strong. And here's a little force and power looking at shot put versus snatch. Which one's more powerful? Well, the force component of the shot is actually pretty small. We got 513 newtons. The snatch, 200 newtons here. I think it's a 150-pound snatch, if I recall. But look at the power output. The shot put is a 35-40% greater power output than the snatch was. That's just throwing a shot. That's a 16-pound ball versus 150. Now, you could argue this as much as you want. That's only an 18.19 meter throw. Imagine the 22 meter throws these guys are putting out there now, how much power they're actually creating. And that's very close. The power they would create with a 22 meter throw is probably very close to what we're seeing in our actually most powerful athletes on the squat when we measure power is Aussie rules football. They're more powerful than our NFL guys because they're usually just a touch linear, but they're also faster a lot of times. And they'll hit, they're hitting, the best I've seen is around 6,000 watts on a guy, which is amazing, to tell you the truth. You ever try to get on one of those things and try to get over 3,000 or 4,000, you understand what that means. It is quite an accomplishment. So mass-based equipment for me, it set the bar, including Olympic lifts. I mean, it did. It set the bar. Here's the standard, guys. Then along came Dennis Kaiser and pneumatic equipment. And, I entered into that world in 1983. I started training my athletes on at Berkeley. And, it raised the bar. It changed the results. It changed the achievements we were making in the 90s. So what we do is we lift with maximum available velocity. The maximum velocity the resistance will allow you to do. You can do this, guys, without worrying about injury. And then because you can do it, and if that resistance is consistent through the entire range of motion, at that velocity you get stronger because you're working that much better throughout each rep. So what we get to, and this is what I wanted to show you, this is the half squat versus free weight squat. This is the Kaiser squat. This was done by Dr. Don Chu. If any of you know who Don is, he's a pretty prolific PT and ATC who was a great high jump coach as well. In 1986, I was at Cal, Don was at Cal State Hayward, and he was doing this. So here is trained on Kaiser squat, trained on a free weight squat, 16 weeks of training. This is pre-test, a mid-test, and a post-test. It's 3 tests. Each tested on the other device as well. So this one's tested on the free weight, this one's tested on the Kaiser Air. This is the free weight curve, this is the Kaiser curve. So at the beginning, you see they weren't too far apart. These numbers happen to just be, they're the same, they just weren't translated to pounds. These are the PSI at the time. So you can see that at the end of this, the free weight group gained about 23%. And the Kaiser group gained 43% in strength. Okay, well, exercise specific. They got better at using the Kaiser squat. Great. But on the free weight squat, that group only improved 17.9% on their own device, and yet improved 34.9% on the Kaiser squat. The Kaiser squat group did. So all they did was train on the Kaiser squat, and they improved their free weight squat 35%. Now I'm telling you, if I have the opportunity to improve 35%, and I don't have to get on a free weight and potentially hurt myself, I'm going the other way every day. And this is what we see in the real world out there. We see it in the NFL, we see it in athletes' performance, we see it in combine training. We see numbers in the 25 to 35% range within 6 weeks of training. Because you've got that consistent resistance all the time. If you want to know more about the science of it, we can talk about it when we're done here. So what it comes down to for me, optimal repetition training. The lowest common denominator in everything we do in the weight room is 1 rep. I want the single best rep I can get every single time. So that means that if I have this force right here, I want to move it at that velocity. If I have this force, I want to move it at that velocity. If I have this force, I want to move it at that velocity. I'm capable of being optimized on this force velocity curve. I can't do that with a mass-based device because they're all speed dependent. And if I show you the curve on it, they're speed dependent, which means that they're all designed to give you a curve at one specific velocity, and it's about 8 seconds. If you go faster than 8 seconds, you lose it. And what does that look like? Now I will go back. It looks like this. This red is a mass-based device. This is Kaiser in here. So then this happens to have a bit of a curve to it because it's variable resistance. But you can see that this is a 1 second rep. Now look at where we started at 40. We're almost twice the resistance at the beginning where you're at your least or your most potential for injury in this particular exercise, which happens to be a leg extension. So with a leg extension and a 1 second rep, I've doubled the resistance at the very beginning where I'm at my most susceptible to injury. Not such a good thing. 2 second rep, I'm still 30%. By the time I get down in here, now I'm in an 8 second rep. If I want to move really slow, there's no reason in the world to even think about Kaiser and using it. If I want to move fast and I want to be on that force velocity curve, if I want to be able to take that resistance and move it at that velocity, then that's why I'm doing it. That's why I chose it. That's why I do it. That's why I use it. Because my people get strong, really, really strong, and they get really powerful. And then we get into, this is actually a testing system, but again, this is what your force velocity curve looks like linearly, and there's your power curve. So we're able to take and actually create, and use a 6 rep test, we can create the resistance at which you achieve your maximum power. So the resistance here happens to be about 320. And so what I'm looking at, and what becomes interesting, and we're going to show you this slide here, what we look at in terms of power, because we see that power is so important, like going up those stairs over there, that's a power move all the way. Hitting the Kaiser, that's power, you know. This is 90% of power. That's kind of an industry standard for power, all right? That's where you say below that, you're really getting away from the power area. But if you look, power can be achieved in 2 places in your power curve. You got low velocity power and high velocity power. It crosses, this bisects the curve at 90% in 2 spots. Now high velocity power would be Mike Powell, the board. Low velocity power would be you going up those stairs out there. You're in this world. Now how do you know you are though, unless you're measuring it? Because you can't manage what you don't measure. If you're not measuring it, you're guessing. And we can't afford to guess in elite sport anymore. The world has gone past guessing. You just can't get there. Unless you have really, really unique parents like Usain Bolt, who has obviously a great set of parents. And so what happens is, let's take a look at, here's our power, our high velocity power is going to occur here with this velocity and this force. Our low velocity at 90% can occur here. So we have two 90%. Which one do you need? Know your race, know your car, build your car. Now we're into zones of low velocity power and high velocity. Here's your low velocity power, here's your high velocity power. It's a paradigm shift in the way you look at things. Because now when we train, we don't train off of 1 RM. We train off a 1 PM, 1 power max. You know, we had the woman who left was telling me that she was she put another 75 pounds on the dummy and was dragging it. Well, she was learning how to drag the dummy slower. Sounds good, but she just practiced being slow. You'd be better off taking a lighter dummy and interspersing it in between the 2 dummies and going heavier and fat and lighter to get you the dummy in the middle. You know, move a dummy faster, move a dummy slower, and then you create the power in the middle. So what sounded good was doing nothing but making her slower without realizing that that's what she was doing.
We'll fill her in. I'll tell her.
Okay.
She's on her feet.
I mean, on top of the fact that she's got a bad back, which means that she's now almost compromising that L5 at the same time. But you know, when you look out there, it's really about moving those feet fast to get that 175 pound dummy back down there. So the faster you can move those feet and learn how to get there, the better off you are. Well, you're not going to learn that with more resistance. You're going to learn it with lighter resistance. Then you might be able to do more and mix the two. You mix them. So the integration of your weight room activity, of your CrossFit even. CrossFit does not integrate. There's not transference there, okay? Transference would be, in your competitive activities are right down there. You know, somebody was asking me, how do I get better on the stairs? Well, you sure as heck don't go squat a lot of weight. That's an immediate recipe for probably failure. Now what you might do though, is you might go out and do step-ups or single leg squats, because that's a single leg activity. Now if I take a 100 kilo guy, and let's say we have 300 kilos he's going to lift, that's 400 kilos total, right? That's 200 kilos in each leg. Same 100 kilo guy, and I put 100 kilos on his back and he's doing step-ups, he's already got 200 kilos on each leg that way as well. And it's a lot safer than putting 300 kilos in your back, and 600 pounds will crush you. But you know, if you put at 200, some of the big guys can handle it. And it's an extreme example, mind you, but I'm talking about big NFL guys in this case. So anyways, you usually can mathematically determine exactly how much resistance you'll get in that single leg versus double leg, and you'll find that more often than not, it's a much safer movement to do. So you go from the Bulgarian squat, the Mike Boyle type of squat, to a step up. And then what's the specific thing you do? You put on a weight vest that's a little bit lighter than, you put on a weight vest a little bit heavier than your gear, and you go start running stadium stairs. You know, and you don't run more than that because you want to get good at that. You don't have to go over that because you're already adding the load. That's the change. You've already added the load. You don't have to do more stairs. You have to do more repetitions, but you don't have to do more stairs because you already changed the load in your body. So you don't change the load in your body and do more stairs. There's 2 variables, and now you're really getting slow. That's not training. That's adding 2 variables on top of 1, so you can get in trouble. And in the end, we always talk, it's all about coordination, really. What I'm seeing out here is a tremendous amount of coordination. The ability to do these things. And I look at guys, and it's funny, the coordination you see the most is the rope pull, bringing that thing up, and making sure that you get that one hand moving the same. Because you see some guys will be shorter on one side, and you can see them struggle. And the other one is when you're pounding the Kaiser, And you see some guys that got that rhythm, and you can tell probably who the good dancers are, because they got that rhythm. You know, you can see boom, boom, boom. They hit it and they're moving with it. And so there's a lot of coordination in there. And strength is coordination training under resistance. So you're always looking. I mean, I see a lot of people out there doing drills for track and field, albeit really bad, but they're still doing them. You know, no offense, but it's hard to watch for a track coach. I mean, it's hard for me to watch people do them anyways because it's a perfection thing for me. But, you know, are they doing them any good? Not if they don't know how to do them, and they don't know why they're doing them. And they're just doing them for maybe they're thinking mobility, or maybe it's going to make them run faster, or they go up the stairs faster. The fact is that if you're doing knee lifts up there, and you're doing thigh lifts, you know, how far do you have to lift your knee to go up those stairs? Are they 6 inch? 8 inch? 9? 9 inches. You know, 9 inches is like that. But what do you have to do on the stairs? You've got to apply force to go up. So when you're doing the drills, there are 2 different drills that look exactly the same. If you're looking at a knee lift or a thigh lift drill. One is you're moving up, the other one is you're moving down. If you want to learn how to go upstairs faster, there's something called a cross-extensor reflex. Anybody ever heard of it before? The better you get at putting down, the easier it comes up. And it's a reflex action. It doesn't take any effort. Your body does it naturally. Boom, boom. It comes right up. Try it sometime. It has to come up. It's really hard to keep your foot down. You know? It's called a cross-extensor reflex. It never comes up up to the central nervous system. It stops here in reflex arm and the legs. So you can actually get better at that. So we go, change is inevitable. You know, progress is optional. There's different ways. There's ways you guys can improve your training. You know, I would suggest that, you know, those of you that are doing CrossFit, that you talk to the guys about allowing some rest to be built in. Most of the CrossFitters are figuring this out now. They've gone through 6, 7 years of this. People have been getting injured. Some get injured, some don't. The ones that don't get injured kind of look like, I mean, they look like weightlifters actually. I mean, they've got their little relatively short, and they've got good shoulders, and they're broad, and they've got strong legs. I mean, they're going to get through it. The tall, lanky guys, a lot of them are getting injured. I've seen it. I've seen a lot of it. We've got 2 CrossFit gyms where I live. Both the guys running them are great, though. They're both master's degree in exercise phys. They understand. They learn how to modify. They are modifying, and that's important. Like I said, it's to me, it is. It can be something for this group of human beings if it's done well and you bring into account the recovery aspect. My athletes, the rule for them is if your feet touch the ground, the next place to go is that you're immersed in water, vertically immersed in water, in deep water. Because 2 things happen in deep water. You got a pressure differential from your feet to your neck. And you've got your lymph ducts here. So you'll have an automatic pressure pumping the lymph out of your body. The waste products are getting pumped out of your body, just being immersed vertically. And then when you add that in, the movement part of it, now you get the muscle contraction and the lymph moving, and on top of that you get the other low pressure system, which is your venous return to the heart, which also then helps push waste products through. So very simply, vertical immersion in water, it helps, particularly as you get older. You know, I kind of have a reputation with older athletes because I teach them how to recover, whether it was Gretzky at 32 or Trace Armstrong or Henry Ellard back in the day, or Willie Banks, who was 32 when I was coaching him, and he first ran over 18 meters at 32. You know, I mean, these are the kind of things you have to take into account as you get older. Your testosterone's not dropping off as much as you might think, but your musculoskeletal system can still no longer take. The protein synthesis does slow down, and so you have to build in the rest once you get past that 40-ish group. I didn't feel it. I don't know when you felt it, Paul. I didn't feel real. I could still dunk at 50. You know, I weighed a little less than I do now, of course, but I could still get off the ground. I didn't feel like an earthling. Today, I feel like an earthling at 60. You know, I've lost my power. I'm still strong, but I don't have the speed side. So no, my power now is all low velocity power. It used to be high velocity power, and now it's shifted because you don't use it, you lose it, basically. I certainly appreciate you guys here. I hope, you know, it's not all about fire. You know, your area, your world it's easy to talk about my world, but maybe you can adapt some of this to your world and make it work. There is, just so you know, there is a project with Tim Adams, who is a strength coach for the Oakland Raiders. He worked with me at the Broncos when I was with the Broncos. And he was a strength coach for the LA Kings as well. They put together a firefighter training manual that they're doing with Kaiser now. They're doing training sessions with that, mostly on the FT and a few other things. So you can get a chance to see Steve down at the van, and he can talk to you about what they're doing there and how they're making it happen.